The letter G stands for guilty. Here's a familiar story. I will get up and go to my father. I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. Here with guilt, I am on familiar ground. Lord knows my life through my schooling and in the Navy would qualify me in many ways as a prodigal son. When I announced to my parents I was going to seminary, their reaction was, "You? You're kidding." My grandmother's reaction along the same lines prompted her to write a letter of apology, for when she heard, she thought it was all a joke. And my inner critic, that inner voice, assured me I was going to make a fool of myself. That inner critic, you know, has never been shy about making me feel guilty. From my earliest schooling on through high school, I lived in guilt for not having done enough studying. You should have gotten 100% on that test, rather than just 92. And there was guilt for doing something I ought not to have done. You shouldn't have had that second glass of wine, let alone the first. My sins of omission and commission kept that inner voice constantly yapping at me. Though I had become rather good at committing the various offenses, I was not successful at ignoring the accumulated guilt, and I became a relentless seeker of forgiveness through nightly prayer rituals which today would earn me a diagnosis of obsessive-compulsive. I would have been a good Roman Catholic. My penchant for succumbing to temptation during my college days and my fraternity years did not lessen. And when I went into the Navy and went to Vietnam, even my inner critic gave up bothering me about what I was doing. Only after I came home did that inner voice wind up again, having discovered a new burden to load on me called survivor guilt. You should have died with them. You don't deserve to be here. That inner voice, I thought, had a point, and I struggled for years until I made peace with living. And now we have this pandemic, and my inner critic is having a field day. I stop at Dunkin' Donuts for coffee. A little voice says, "What if that cup is carrying the virus? Didn't you just wipe your lips? How can you go back home without going into quarantine?" I listen and get angry with myself for having displayed poor judgment and given in to temptation again. I go to the post office to mail some documents and come home to work at the computer. And the inner voice speaks. "You forgot to wash your hands when you came in. Now you have to disinfect everything you touch. Do you remember where you went? Are you sure you got it all?" I listen and I become frustrated that I have forgotten the ritual. And no, I do not recall every spot I touched. Even the final card is played. Did you see today's death count? Why are you not a statistic as well? That inner bastard is relentless. But for me, guilt is an old companion. And in a few minutes, I'm able to evaluate the accusations, run my repair tapes, as I call the process, and place whatever the event was in a proper context over against the totality of the gift of living. The inner critic was right about something. He told me by going to seminary and going into the ministry, I would make a fool of myself. I've done so. For Christ's sake, I have done so. And I don't regret it one bit.